Welcome to Outdoor Gear Chat. This is episode 64. I can't get my words out in excitement. This is our Everest 50th anniversary series, part one. I'm joined as always by Cathy. Hi, Cathy. How are you doing?
Hi, Wayne. Yeah, it's super exciting. And you may remember, or our listeners may remember, way back in episode 13, when we recorded the big history of the Climbers Shop and the Joe Brown shops, which I co-own with my husband and I've been a director of for the last 20 years. We talked about our link with our Ambleside shop in particular, with Community Action Nepal as a charity. And that charity was set up by the mountaineer Doug Scott. And it's 50 years this year since Doug and Dougal Haston became the first Britons to stand on the summit of Everest on the 24th of September 1975, after what was one of the biggest, hardest, shortest, and the first expedition to Everest that summited via a face, the South West Face. So it was a really pivotal expedition of the time. And we thought this is a perfect opportunity to celebrate this. So we're working with one of our suppliers, Mountain Equipment, to have a history window installed in our Ambleside shop, which will run throughout August. And we thought as well we would do this 5-part special where we're going to be talking with some incredible people about the equipment and about the evolution of mountaineering as a sport, and that history of that sport as well. So to kick it off, we're starting with a very high bar, I have to say. We have, we're absolutely honoured to be joined by two members of that 1975 team, two men who have an incredible amount of climbing experience between them. In fact, I've probably used up the whole podcast just trying to explain a portion of how much climbing experience they have between them. So Chris Bonington is known as one of the UK's most famous climbers and has a climbing career spanning 70 years, and he was the leader of the 1975 expedition, the largest expedition to leave the UK at the time. So welcome, Chris.
Lovely to be here.
And we also have Paul Braithwaite, who has a mere 60-year climbing career, and Tut was integral with, along with Nick Escort, in cracking the rock band above 8,000 meters and fixing ropes for that successful ascent. So welcome, Tut.
Thank you very much. I look forward to it.
Yeah,
only 60 years as well. That's just
it's
terrible.
Probably exaggerated.
Yeah.
I'm only 29.
Yeah. Easy paper round.
I was 79 yesterday.
Wow.
Oh, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. This is amazing. I'm so excited about this. And when we've got the mountain, he says in inverted commas, is in the news quite a bit at the moment as well, isn't it? It's for all sorts of reasons. It's great to have you two on. And Chris, I years, many moons ago, too many for both of us to mention. I think I'm fairly sure you spoke at my primary school in Milnthorpe back in a lot of years ago. So I've got a very distant memory of me as a small child hearing you speak. So really looking forward to more tales today.
Well, I think I've spoken in just about every small town,
Can
a few villages in the whole breadth of the United Kingdom in the last kind of 50 years.
Indeed, yeah, and probably outside the UK as well, I imagine.
Oh
yeah.
So I mean, the 1975 expedition was one of the largest, as I've said, to not just or to leave the UK at the time. And just to sort of kind of put some context around that for people listening, that involved 24 tons of equipment, 18 climbers, 4 BBC crew and 1 Sunday Times reporter, even before you got to Nepal, and added 38 high altitude porters, 30 iceball porters, and almost 400, I don't want to say regular porters because that demeans their importance, because everybody on the expedition was vital. But Chris, was there a single point during the planning stage when you first began to understand the magnitude, not just of the climb, but the logistics. And when was the first time you saw the whole team and the equipment together?
Well, I think you never actually saw everything together at any one moment. I mean, even when you got to the mountain, they were still scattered in different places, so that they never all came together at all. And you were just very aware, though, of the fact that, well, I was very aware of just how massive this whole thing was. And I think in those, at night, when you start thinking of things and you start visualizing it. And I think the thing that I was most frightened of actually was that I knew there was a risk of losing people, but I just dreaded the fact that I might lose people through a mistake that I made, so that I could be personally responsible for somebody's death. And that was something that always frightened me. And it only happened once in my climbing life when I had actually made a mistake. And that was on K2. And I thought that a certain slope was perfectly safe. And so I said, yes, we should go over it. And I remember then even Doug was worried about it. He said, I think you should go over it. I said, no, it'll be all right. And I was in, I wanted to get the whole thing done and through. And I'll never forget when I dropped back to a camp just below. This huge avalanche came rushing down. And I went to grab a camera to get a picture of it. And I think the guy, I forget who it was with me, said, for Christ's sake, do you realize one of our guys could be in that? And that horrible reality hit me. And it was. Nick Escort was being swept to his death. He was one of my closest friends. So those are, one of the terrible moments in your own climbing experience.
Yeah, it's a huge responsibility, isn't it?
Oh, it is, yeah.
And especially when things haven't been done before as well, I guess, isn't it? It's that you're literally breaking ground or pathfinding or those sort of terms.
Well, that's the whole reason for doing it, of course.
Indeed.
I mean, it's going into the unknown, and adventure is about the unknown. And if you know all the results, if you know everything, it's no longer an adventure. So adventure is actually going into the unknown and then facing those challenges as you come.
Indeed, and that overcoming that adversity, however it presents itself, whether it's weather, kit, the mountain, or so on. It's how you manage that, how you deal with it, I guess. But you have been at multiple times in very, very remote areas, and there's no one there. In terms of where we all live, I guess there's no mountain rescue that could come and help you at those times, was there? It was a matter of getting yourself out.
None whatsoever. In some ways, I think that was great. I mean, I think today there's something, I think with AI and everything else, it's taken all the uncertainty out. I mean, it's one of the problems that they have for the exam system and everything else. You can actually, with AI, anything you want to know, you just ask Alexa and you're told what it is. And I mean, that I think is sad in many ways. Whereas when Tut and I were there then, none of that was there. And so that you had to work it out for yourself. Yeah. And I think that's what made it really worthwhile.
That's an interesting... Sorry.
Tut?
Yes, Chris.
I was just wondering, what do you think about the way things have changed like this?
Oh, well, I mean, you summed it up perfectly well. The way it's changed is, and I was sort of looking back this morning about it, and it's 50 years since we were there, and things have moved on in mountaineering 50 years from when we were there. But when we were there, we were only 50 years on from when Mallory team were exploring the north side. So it's probably just about right, really, that's the progress in technology and climbing equipment and communication. So I am on Facebook, so I'm bombarded by ascents at Everest and speed records and youngest and oldest. And I've passed the point of trying to judge anything. That everybody has a story. And so from a point of view of mountaineering, I no longer do any mountaineering, but I'm always impressed by people's achievements, really. And the reason they do them is very personal, as long as they're not spoiling it for everybody else. It's a very personal achievement. So I'm very supportive of people's achievements, really. I'm really pleased that we were there in that space, because, it was more, from my point of view, for our point of view, it was much more of an adventure. It was much more of an old-fashioned feel to it, where we had mail runners and, didn't expect letters and so on and so forth. So, yes, the times have changed, and whether I haven't, I'm not. I'm a 1930s boy, really, when things were slower. I don't keep up with technology. I just find it totally sucks every little bit of what's left of my brain up. So obviously it's changed. It's changed for the equipment, and I sort of listen to people and watch things, and the equipment's improved, obviously, and people are climbing. They're much fitter than I was. Generally, the top end of the mountaineers these days, and much fitter, and the equipment's lighter, and they're more specifically trained for an event. I should rather suspect a lot more training goes into people attempting high altitude peaks than I did, though I did a lot of running and a lot of climbing. So from my generation, we trained on the crag on the weekends, or we just climbed. I didn't do any, apart from running, I didn't do any particular training for expeditions.
So
these
days
I would think.
I was going to say, you weren't sat in a tent for 3 months acclimatizing.
Yeah.
No.
In a warehouse somewhere outside London, which is,
No, I just took acclimatization in my stride. I was always fit, and I was, quite able to technically to get around to enjoy climbing. But I just took it in my stride, and I was listening to Chris, and I've often said this, because I was just a climber in those days. I was just into climbing, and fortunately I was invited on this trip. But I sort of, if I hadn't have been invited on, it was kicked the whole thing off, did Chris. I invited me on Everest, a change of life for me. And as I got older, and so back to that, then when I went to Everest with Chris and team, and I was just a climber. And afterwards, I began to appreciate Chris's depth of his commitment to this trip as I started to manage small businesses and run them. And they were relatively small compared to what Chris was doing on Everest in '75. But the commitment was there, and the dread of accidents happening were there. And he coped with it very well, I must say. He did cope with that pressure incredibly. He didn't seem to overspill outside his own sort of tent, if you like. So we didn't get much. I don't feel any pressure from Chris at all. He got a little bit ratty eye up on the rock band at one time when I was a bit slow on coiling a rope.
Patience was never a virtue with me.
It didn't make any difference whatsoever. I couldn't have been called it any quicker anyway. So, but yes, I admire people who are doing things in different ways and keeping up with the modern trends. I'm not sure where it's all going to go. It's any of my business anymore. But you cannot ignore it. It's good, and everybody must have joy at some point for different reasons.
Yeah.
There are times when I would have liked to have a line of steps to a summit. It would have been wonderful, as it is now.
Ladders and everything.
To be quite honest with you, we always, oh God, there's some steps in, but. We pretended to be disappointed, but really we were quite delighted.
I can well imagine. And a couple of times within what you've just said, you've mentioned about equipment, and it's almost back to the groundbreaking comment, I suppose. Is there was a bunch of stuff which was worked upon for the attempt, which was brand new. We were prototyping mountain equipment. We're doing a load of made to measure stuff. What did all those sort of equipment firsts mean to your experience? How did that help, do you think, or not? How did it was?
Well, they're all vital to the equipment you use. Are basically the tools that you use to actually get up the mountain and achieve success. And therefore, I've always believed in using the best equipment I can get. And I'm aware I'm a bit of a gear freak. in the sense that if anything comes up, I want to be there and I want to get it and I want to try it. And I think that's important. And I think that therefore you're using those bits of equipment, but those bits of equipment are enabling you to actually do what you want at that time. But I think flipping back a tiny bit, I think when you look at or compare the early climbers and what they've done, and then what we do now, I think there's the basic principles there remain exactly the same. And if you look around, around the kind of newsletters, the Alpine Club, etc., our young climbers are doing some absolutely incredible things now. And so, though there's a general trend, if you like.
Hi, Kath, I'm on a Zoom call. Can you ring back? Cheers. Yes, okay, I will do, yes.
Technology, eh?
And so I think I've lost my train of thought now. Where was I?
How equipment has evolved and helping younger climbers in particular to really achieve fast and light and incredible, I suppose, technical routes in perhaps lower mountains. But in a way, you know, that's where a huge amount of today's innovation is moving to, isn't it, for mountaineering as a sport?
Well, it is. Well, it's partly because all the big things are being done, basically. And the big grumble there, if you like, is that all the 8,000 meter peaks are being climbed. But I think that's a good thing, because there's in the lower peaks, the peaks, 6,000 meters and so, there are literally hundreds of unclimbed peaks of that altitude. And the beauty there is that you're not going to try to climb that mountain to achieve a record, because, nobody's going to be particularly interested, and that's a good thing. And so the young climbers of today, and they're doing it, they can go off and they can climb a 6,000 meter peak. They can have a superb adventure. They can go into the unknown and absolutely everything else. And that, I think, is a great thing.
Yeah, very definitely. And actually, we're really excited further along in this series to be talking with some people that are really climbing at the top of their game at the moment and pushing boundaries. So, we're going to sort of talk about the whole kind of evolution of mountaineering, which is super exciting. I know one of the 75 expedition came on the back of the 1972 expedition, of course, and I think there was a 73 Japanese expedition as well. And in your book, Everest the Hard Way, Chris, you describe sort of digging down to establish Camp 3 and finding remnants of those expeditions and salvaging, in particular, the food. And I can imagine just everyone is like, yeah, something different to eat. But I know there was a huge amount of work put into food before you left the UK, and I'm looking at menus for not just for different nationalities, but also different for different sections and levels of the mountains. So different diets for base camp, different diets for sort of Camp 3, different diets for summit days as well. And a lot of that is outlined in the appendices at the back of your book, which I kind of rediscovered while I was sort of researching for this. And it's just fascinating on the kit side of things and the food side of things. So basically, feeding 100 people on the mountain for 12 weeks, that's a lot of food and a lot of working out. Do you think at that point on the 75 expedition in particular, was nutrition sort of really starting to be seen as an important part of planning and protecting not just people from maintaining their energy, but also sort of protecting from frostbite and hypothermia?
Well, I think so. I mean, all the information was out there. And once again, I think in planning an expedition like that, I looked at as much information as I possibly could. So I think I'd digested most of that. And so in my planning, I was thinking of that. as I put the entire expedition together, and particularly planned the food and so on. So you did your best to plan everything you possibly could. And then, of course, crises occur. And that is, however carefully you've planned anything, something's going to go wrong. And then the challenge is to act in, I suppose, good leadership is actually to be able to adjust to a major crisis and then take a set of logical kind of steps to actually reduce that crisis or save more lives, even if some lives have been lost.
Yeah, that's incredibly important. And I know, Paul, Everest is described as a non-technical mountain. Some of those climbing descriptions in the rock band, in particular, where you were climbing so high, they just sound desperate. And at one point you describe using your body weight to release some frozen ropes, and as they sort of released, it felt like you were kind of sort of falling for a lifetime, and then belaying off a spent oxygen bottle. But how did you maintain dexterity for sort of your hands and your extremities during that time?
Just a sec. We're trying to establish my... Am I still on screen with you guys?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Okay, it's gone off at my end. But anyway, I'll carry on talking. It's quite easy. Yes, can you ask that question again? Sorry.
I can. Yeah, no problem. So you describe actually sort of having to free frozen ropes during that technical climbing section above 8,000 meters, and belaying off a spent oxygen bottle, and obviously at that kind of altitude, life's pretty tough, and in those kind of extreme conditions. How did you maintain dexterity for dealing with oxygen cylinders, for dealing with climbing equipment, while sort of keeping them protected in that kind of temperature and environment?
I don't think I can speak on behalf of Nick as well, because we were working very closely as a team and spoke about it lots afterwards. But I don't recall that being an issue, really. You just, as a climber, as a mountaineer, you just get on with that, and deal with it as as an event when it happens. There was no backup. We just had gloves and mittens and went on with it. But the climbing, I think it hit Nick and I at the rock when we stepped onto the first part of the rock band. That I just happened to be in front on the person leading the first few pitches, and it didn't really occur to us that we stepped. When I've seen pictures of this zone of rock stripped down, Doug took some pictures in '72. I could fully understand. If I'd have seen those pictures before we went onto it, I probably would have been a lot more careful of what I was attempting. But the rock was very, very compact initially, and we struggled to get any form of good protection into it. I later found out it was a seabed millions of years ago, and so it's a limestone. It's like climbing on a limestone cliff,
right,
at 28,000 feet. And so the cracks that appeared to be there, in fact, weren't. They were just seams that just ran into blankness. So getting protection in was incredibly difficult and time-consuming. And also, when you sort of looked up what you thought would be a ledge or a foothold, in fact, it was a sloping shelf, because it had millions of years of spindrift and frost and what have you, winds. So everything sloped to down with wear and tear of millions of years of weather. Really.
Of abrasion,
so it was particularly frustrating. And leading a section, whatever section you were leading, was the hardest pitch on the climb. So, it was making the way through and making judgments so that you didn't put yourselves in too much of in jeopardy, really. And one of the ways, but we were climbing all the time, and we were into the zone. And for us, very much so, Nick and I, and probably the rest of the guys as well, apart from the altitude factor, which you have to deal with, we were totally in our zone with the technical side, and so we Nick and I often say for us it just felt like a long day in Scotland doing a grade 4. It was just a very good climbing day with the added altitude. Didn't help, but it was just what we did. It was what we expected to be doing, I expect, and so it was just a case of get on with it and do it. And at one point, I ran out of oxygen somewhere parts of the rock band, and so did Nick. And we didn't even discuss it. We just simply carried on. There was no, panic, because we were fit, climatized, and we were slower. Obviously, when we ran out of oxygen, we were very much slower. But we just plodded on and did what we felt was right for the time. But we didn't. I don't think neither of us actually took ourselves away from where we were, and analysed what we were doing. We just went at it like a bullet in China shop, really. And that's what we expected to do. And so I was with Nick, who was a fantastically solid guy. He was just a great guy to be climbing with, and temperament-wise, we got on together. He was a really wonderful partner, really. Sadly, he died 3 years later, so he hasn't been around for the last 47 years to share this, program like this with us. It would have been interesting to share some time with him and get his views, Yeah. But and the climbing was technical. It was about, I thought about it quite a lot, without trying to overplay it. Take all the factors on board, and it was like climbing an average good Scottish grade 4 at 20,000 feet, with very poor scant protection, I might add.
Yeah. Oh.
and I'm just sort of reflecting on what you just said there, to be and wondering, it's not the same league, some of the stuff I've done, but sometimes you're just there to do something with your mates, and all you want to focus on is doing it, isn't it? And bearing in mind what you said about Chris, I guess Chris had done all the logistic stuff behind it, and you could just rock up and climb. Is that
exactly? And from that point of view, I mean, it was just do what we do. And Chris took. I hadn't a clue what was going on with the food. I just know it was all right, and Mike Thompson was organised it. And one of the things about this expedition, more than most, I would think, right from the start, there was a lot of energy in the packing, the organising, Chris's side of it, transport, and equipment. Dave Clark, who then ran Santa Sport, was fantastically, on it when it came to equipment, getting suppliers involved and getting perfect measures. I mean, Pete Hutchinson at Mountain Equipment used to do personal leg measurements for us, so we didn't get knee bends, and we weren't suffering from pressure on the knees when we're wearing the down suit or the windsuit. So it was, there's a lot of input from a lot of people with a lot of knowledge and a great deal of energy running up to the climb. So we felt like we were just the front end of a very good team, really, at the time we were there.
I think I'd just take this moment to give a shout out to all the little scouts who helped pack the initial expedition clothing and equipment into what ended up being two 16-ton Ford trucks, which were driven out by 3 professional drivers. I think there was 5 drivers in total, who drove night and day with 3 scheduled stops, which were Ankara, Tehran, and New Delhi. So that was 7,000 miles in 24 days, and through 22 customs posts in what was quite a different world at the time. And you can imagine some customs posts you could have rocked out and been there for 22 days, basically, couldn't you? So I think that energy and literally starting months and months and months before. I mean, it's a bit of a large question to ask, but do you have any idea of, from sort of concept to, I suppose you're still talking about it now, so the actual time input for the expedition has never ended, has it? It's still going on.
Are you asking me or Chris on this one?
Either, actually.
Either, both.
That kind of time from sort of concept to I suppose landing back in the UK. What was that kind of time frame? Was it months? Was it years?
No, well, we got
it was months rather than years. I
yes,
can say that if you think of it from when I got permission, well, even there, I was when I got the original, we made our first attempt, and then we got our second permission. And at that point, I initially thought that I didn't want to get involved in the organizing another huge expedition. It takes 24 hours a day, just about, for several months before and after. And so I didn't want to do it. And so I wanted to go and try to make basically a without oxygen ascent of the ordinary route up Everest. And I think it was Doug that finally, and both Doug and Dougal kind of came to me and said, look, you know, if we did that, wouldn't we, when we went past, because to do that, you actually go up the Western Coombe and you've got the Great South Face here and you pass it and you go up to the South Col. And they said, well, wouldn't we just, when we looked up at that, wouldn't we think we should be there? We should. And they persuaded me to change. And so I changed back to having another go at the Southwest Face. Of course, it was all very well for them. They didn't have to get sleepless nights that I was going to have to spend trying to get the support and everything else. But they were absolutely right. And that was how we came to do the Southwest Face for Everest.
Amazing. Yeah.
It's bonkers, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Just a little conversation, you know, takes everything on such a huge, hugely different trajectory. It's fascinating.
Goodness, yeah.
But I suppose Everest is termed as a non-technical mountain by mountaineers. But I think there's still. And I don't get it belittled, you know, there's obviously, it's in the news a lot. People are paying to go to the summit who don't have any climbing experience per se. But it's colossal, it's huge. And it takes you to a part of the world where humans shouldn't exist. And I think one of the real key things for me that stays with the expedition was Dougal and Doug. They had to bivvy, and they did survive the highest bivvy ever survived at that point. And there's a fantastic black and white image of both you, Paul, and you, Chris, watching Doug and Dougal on the way to the summit in the book, The Everest Years. And you can almost feel sort of the tension coming out of the page. And they then disappeared. They survived their highest bivouac at the time. I can't imagine what that night must have been like for you, Chris, as a leader. But what were your feelings seeing them in the morning after and then speaking with them about their summit and their survival, Chris?
It was just a huge sense of relief that, in fact, because I really wonder, I think we all wondered, you know, have they survived? And could they be alive? And so to actually see, you know, two dear friends come down and who are alive, and the sense of joy, oh, thank God, you know, that they're there. And I remember I just hugged them. And interestingly enough, I can remember the picture of John Hunt, where after the 53 ascent, it was exactly the same thing.
Yes.
When the summiters came, he rushed forward and hugged them. And that is how you feel when you're leading a big expedition, because, you know, especially our expeditions, every single one of that team, they were all friends. They were all people I knew and I'd invited, both because of their ability, but because I knew them. And because I knew them, I knew their strengths, their weaknesses, and how they could work within the expedition. And so that, you know, it made it was a very personal thing. And I think so many of these more recent expeditions, and certainly your kind of commercial expeditions, where nobody knows each other. And I think there the problem comes that as they troop up the mountain, and there's this awful great long queue of people going up, and at times, you know, they're walking or actually stepping over dead people and so on. And I think it must be appalling.
Yeah.
And I think we were just so incredibly lucky to actually do that when we did it.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a lot that to think about within that, I guess, because like I guess as Paul you described is, you know, or maybe you didn't say it in these terms, but I was understanding that you know each other's strengths and weaknesses and how to help each other or support each other, or when, I don't know, if somebody's grumpy they need feeding is a great example that I've always had. Is, you know, I know when my mate starts grumbling, he needs some calories down his neck, and that. So that was definitely a positive, a benefit to your to your attempt, wasn't it? I guess because you did have that. You knew each other so well.
Oh yeah, and sort of you're right there. You get to know each other well before you go on this sort of climb, trip, expedition. And Nick, I didn't have a problem with Nick because he's always grumpy. So,
right.
I get worried when he's not grumpy. That's the thing that used to worry me.
Yeah.
But he was a great guy to be with, and he was a very practical, very good climber, great mountaineer, and a lot of and safe. And so, I felt like. And also, I'll add at this point that when Chris had decisions to make and about teams, and a lot of the guys who were on the trip didn't necessarily acclimatise well. They were very good climbers, and on this particular time, they didn't acclimatise, so they got stepped behind a little bit. And so when it narrowed down to Nick and I being asked to take the rock band on for first attempt, I was absolutely delighted with it. But at the back of my mind, I thought, well, the summit's the place I wanted to be, like all of us. So, but, and I will say this, and to confirm what I've always said, if I was managing that trip, in hindsight, the two people I would have chosen to go to the top for the first attempt, because of their ability, their strength, and their knowledge, would have been Doug and Dougal, definitely. And so, from that point of view, there's never been an issue with the choice of teams or decisions made. It was always the way it is and the way it was. So people often ask me, is there anything, sinister? There's nothing, it's sort of in the book, it says it, and what happened is what happened. So there was no feeling of disappointment from Nick and I. We didn't climb to the top because we went back up to the rock, back up to 8,000 meter, and felt very good. But the weather turned severely bad, resulting in Nick Burke being swept off the mountain or avalanched off or went through a cornice, we don't know. So it wasn't a choice thing. It was a case of getting off the mountain from almost 8,000 meters again. So, it all worked out quite very well from that point of view. There was never any, I've not felt any feelings other than that. The leadership was fantastic. The climbing team was good. The support was good. The energy levels were high. There was a lot of feeling of success around the place. And so, in all, it was a magic place to be. In my life, it was very important. And being on Everest in that time, it did change my life a little bit in my lifestyle, which was good for me. And so, it's part of my life, which I took part in. Prior to Everest, of course, I was just a regular guy climbing in the Alps a lot. It's a high standard, I must say, and rock climbing and ice climbing, winter climbing. So I'd been on a couple of expeditions prior to Everest at altitude on Peak Lenin and felt fairly strong, to be honest. I didn't have any issues with it. But that's what I did all the time. I was regular 10 stone 7 forever, And so it was a damn good time in my life. And I think for all of us, it was a moment of change, in our attitude towards things.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it has changed your life, I guess, as you say, hasn't it? For all sorts of reasons.
Yes.
Yeah. I suppose that kind of the team coming together, the camaraderie, that was obviously very important. I know, Chris, you chose Sherpas that you'd worked with previously, but you still had a huge kind of number of people from very different backgrounds. I think there was over 100 porters to get 24 tons of equipment just to base camp, and then you got the high altitude porters, the icefall porters on top of that. Yours was the first expedition to work with the newly formed Sherpa cooperative, and Patemba was the youngest Sherpa at the time, managing them, and the local people were obviously key to your success. But how much were they also part of the enjoyment of the expedition as well?
I think it was a matter of, very much part of the enjoyment of the expedition and the enjoyment of the experience, if you like, was actually getting the best out of all these different people. But for instance, going back to choosing who should actually go to the summit first, and there I spent an awful lot of time thinking about it. It was at night, and I'd be wondering now, who should, it's a critical choice. How do you select your summit pair? And the the strongest pair were obviously Doug and Dougal. But do you actually put them together, or do you give yourself, if you like, a better chance by splitting them up? And so having one on the first summit bid, the other on the second summit bid. And I was spending an awful time thinking about that. And I finally thought, well, I'll ask one of them. And I was probably closer to Dougal than I was to Doug. And so I asked Dougal, I said, well, just if you were in the summit team, who would you want to go to the top with? And he, without any hesitation whatsoever, said Doug. And that decided me. So it was using his judgment. And I said, okay, right, I'll put them together, which was absolutely the right decision to take.
Yeah, fantastic. So you had, was it five summiteers in total? There was,
yeah.
I've managed to put my notes down, and I put a piece of paper on top of them. I did have them all named, but from that point of view, it was very successful just from the sheer point of having so many members of the team summit. But I think, and I'm going to go back again to the logistics that you mentioned, Paul, that you were buried in, Chris, because I love the descriptions in your book, where basically you were camped out at Camp 2, and this is before computers. I think it's really important for everybody to remember this. So no spreadsheets, they weren't a thing, and it was just you and your typewriter at Camp 2 making lists upon lists upon lists upon lists, and that just blows my mind. Actually, I think one of the words used to describe your typing was hypermania. You're just like absolutely laser focused there. But there was it was early days for computers, wasn't it? And I think computing, a model was used to help sort of visualize the logistics, but it proved that it wasn't advanced enough to deal with moving men and food and non sort of perishable equipment and everything else like that to get it up and down to the camps. Did you? And you worked with that modelling before you left the UK, did you?
Well, I'm slightly amazed actually when I think of what I was doing, because I think I was well ahead of my time.
Yeah.
In actual fact, but I remember, but on that one, I didn't actually. I'd worked out this set of kind of algorithms, I suppose, for working it out, which were quite complicated and quite complex. And in fact, as you say, they're so bloody complicated. We'd set out before I'd finished them. And then, as it happened, it actually worked out roughly as I'd planned.
Excellent. Yeah, I think actually in the appendices you put in the plan and also the actual, and there's not a lot of difference.
No.
Yeah.
But I know, I mean, I think the book, the 75 Everest book, I think became a kind of a reference book for all expedition leaders, because I think in that book there is practically every single kind of, in the appendices, don't bother to read the text. The appendices have almost all, every calculation you need to make or not make to actually try to get a mountain climbed.
Yeah, they were fascinating. They had me well and truly engrossed when I was rediscovering those, definitely. And so I guess finally a question to both of you, because you were very close friends with Doug, and you've both been extremely important and instrumental into the growth and continuation of his charity, Community Action Nepal. And I think sort of that charity has helped manifest education and health posts within areas of very remote areas of Nepal, and can you describe really how you've seen the charity impact the people on your trips back there since well, in 36 years, I suppose, since Doug founded it? How have you sort of seen that grow, Paul?
The growth has been tremendous, but steady growth. It's not been a leap forward and then stop. It's been a long, steady growth, all energized by Doug, really. He was the charger behind it all, and the battery that kept it all going, and quite remarkable, really. And so what Community Action's done in Nepal for local people is immense, really, and it's all very personal. It always has been very personal. The charity is a very personal thing to a lot of us, so it doesn't feel like we're doing anything other than what we're expected to be involved with, especially when the earthquake crashed through the region in about 5-6 years ago, which destroyed virtually all the infrastructure of Cairns buildings, really, and they were replaced and rebuilt, mainly by Doug being so brutal with himself and getting out there and talking to people. He was the typical old-fashioned sort of foreman, Doug, when he was out there on site. I used to see him in these captions, right at the front end, ordering people around, showing people what to do, always pointing at something. And his immense strength and of character and strength of values is the reason why Can has been so good. And when he passed away 5 years ago, we were really in a bit of a quandary as to what direction we're going to go in. And we all sat tight, Chris and I and a few others sat tight with the fact that we're involved, we'll stay involved and work through it. And we did, so we've got a relatively new team now, working very hard and doing very well. A slightly different approach for fundraising, because Doug was a massive fundraiser.
Yes.
And massive. I helped with a lot of lecture tours, and his work involved with those was just astronomical. It wasn't the best of health. The best of his ankles and knees were poor, and he got through it all, trudged through it all in an amazing stoic style that Doug was as a person. So, and the work, the relationships between the staff based here and the staff in Kathmandu, Nepal, are so close, and it all works very well together, because we're very open about what we do, try to be, and we all work hard for the cause, really, and the cause is Community Action Nepal. And we're having our 50th anniversary in September, and really pleased to see that Ang Ferpa and Patemba, the two Sherpas who were Serdar and Sherpa who were on the trip, they're still around and coming over to see us again. So there is that friendship which has been extended through 50 years, so it's all through Can and Doug, really, I suppose, that's kept that together.
Oh,
so
that's
it's
fantastic.
immense, really, what Doug did. Amazing.
Yeah. And what does being involved with the charity still mean for you, Chris?
Well, I think it's done so much, and I think if you look, there are a huge number of very, very good NGOs operating in Nepal. But I think of all the NGOs, I think Can is the best of them. I mean, the others are excellent, but Can it's particularly focused. It's focused in exactly the right direction, and and what Doug did to get Can going is quite extraordinary. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I think we actually do touch on that in episode 62 when we caught up with some of the Can team at Kendall Mountain Festival, and episode way back in episode 36, actually we talked with some of the team, and also from the team from Can, and also from Community Action Treks as well, and sort of talked about kit lists of trekking in Nepal and things like that. So there's loads to go back and listen to. But I mean, it's been absolutely fantastic to chat with you both today, and thanks so much for being so generous with your time. We really, really do appreciate it. It's been an absolute honour just to, well, I think I said at the start, it was the biggest expedition by the hardest route in the shortest time, to the summit of Everest. It still stands tall there for, well, every pun intended, as a huge achievement. So thank you so much for joining us today and for your time. It's been great.
Well, it's been great talking to you.
Thank you very much for your time as well.
Oh, well, I'm going to leave us with a quote actually from Dave Clark, the Duracell battery that was the equipment officer of the expedition, and who sort of signed off his appendix by saying, "So my lasting memory will not be of data under control and successfully coordinated, but it will be of golden sunset seen from Camp 4 and the warm sound of Sherpa laughter from the tent next door." I thought that was lovely. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. What a beautiful quote. It takes you right there. Yeah. So you've been listening to Outdoor Gear Chat, and there are many links in the show notes to the books written about the 75 expedition. There's also a link to a film on YouTube about that was filmed in 1975 as well, which is really well worth a watch. I thoroughly enjoyed that. There is also a number of exhibitions coming up, as Paul said, to celebrate the anniversary with Community Action Nepal. So one of those will be at the Heaton Cooper studio in Grasmere across the summer. We'll be having our mountain equipment history window in our Ambleside shop at the Climbers Shop. And we also have a selection of old equipment on display as well. So we have a whole load of links available there. So go across and have a look. If you're planning your own trip to Nepal, then we have everything for you for trekking in right through the way through to climbing 8,000 meters. And all of that range is available at our website, www.climbers-shop.com. And we also have a huge array of free to access knowledge and information on our sister website, which is the Joe Brown Outdoor Academy. And that is available at www.joebrownoutdooracademy.com.